Smarties, today we are excited to bring you the second half of our conversation with Dr. Elliott, who is the Chief Academic Officer for Touch Math. Last week, she shared all about what dyscalculia is, and this week she is sharing with us what to do about it. She shares principles of how to help learners with dyscalculia with 4 instructional strategies, and she'll also share about learner strategies, including schemas and giving oneself more time and positive self-talk, in addition to a lot of other things. She'll also share her do's and don'ts, and we love lists like that. Also, we are releasing today our extended conversation with Dr. Elliott on our Patreon. You can go and hear that extended conversation by supporting the work that we're doing, and with a $5 a month donation. That's www.patreon.com/LearnSmarterPodcast. You can hear our extended conversation with her and all the other fabulous guests that we've had on in the past. Let's dig in.
You want to learn faster, but sometimes working harder is just not the answer. You have to learn smarter. The Educational Therapy Podcast.
Hi, Smarties. Welcome to episode 327 of Learn Smarter, the Educational Therapy Podcast. I'm Stephanie Pitts.
And I'm Rachel Kapp.
And today we are excited to continue the conversation with Dr. Sandra Elliott about dyscalculia and all the things.
And maybe we knew, but we needed to be reminded.
Also, there's so much learning, and I love to relearn. I'm relearning.
Yep. So we've talked about the early signs and sort of the poor marketing of dyscalculia, but what do we do? What are the principles of helping this population?
Let me break it down into ABCD.
Love it.
So when I work with teachers, we talk about with dyscalculia, first thing you need to do is, I'll make the assumption that we have screened, we have diagnosis is there, and we're starting on it. First thing you do is getting a little bit of knowledge about dyscalculia, what the issues are that the child is going to have. So understanding the child. Mm-hmm. And what math is it? What age are they? What math do I want them to learn? And where are they actually in it? So I'm going to make those 2 assumptions. And then out of my teaching toolkit, I am going to pull out 2 sets of tools. One are the tools that I use as a teacher or an educational therapist to help that child, master the math skills and concepts. Those are instructional strategies. But I'm also going to pull out of my toolkit the tools that I'm going to hand the child, which we never really talk about, which are the learner strategies. What does that child use going forward, maybe permanently for their entire life, in order to do the math? So there's the instructional strategies that I use as the educator, and then there's the learner strategies that I hand them, their tools. The instructional strategies that we know work are something that we all learned at university, but because most of us were afraid of mathematics, and we maybe got one little content course, but the methodology, the pedagogy is, pretty doggone clear. It's explicit systematic instruction. It's directly, hand over hand. It is me modeling it. It is me giving you part of the problem, and I've worked the other one. We do it together. And then it is me watching you do it. It is model, lead, test. Those portions of it. That one's super important because this is mathematics. It is making sure that that child always has access to concrete, manipulatives, 3D things. That's what mathematics is. It's, the abstraction of a physical world so that you can solve problems. So I have concrete, I have representational, so I have 2-dimensional things. I can draw out what a problem is. And then I have the abstract, which is your 3s, your 7s, your pluses, your minuses, your X's and your Y's. But that's how our human brains translate the physical world, the math problem, into something that's abstract, an algorithm. But a child with dyscalculia needs to know that if I can't remember the algorithm because I've got attention problems, I've got memory problems, well, you know what? I can listen to the word problem and I can sketch it out. I've got a train here and I can draw the arrow. I can write the 3. I don't have to memorize the algorithm. I can go back and figure it out because there's more than one way to solve this math problem. And if I'm having problems with that, I can actually take, paper clips. I can take Unifix cubes. I can build the problem. So that's the second really important instructional strategy, is the use of the CRA framework. The third one is going to be multisensory. When I described the brain, I talked about the visual cortex, the auditory, the frontal lobes. I talked about the interparietal sulcus. Math, the regions of the brain that do a math problem are all of those. It's all of my senses, which is why multisensory, if I've got disruptions in the connections between those, so I don't hear the numeral as well as I should, but I'm seeing it, I've got ways to solve the problem. So it says, if as a teacher, I'm making sure the child hears me talk the numerals, sees me writing them, I'm manipulating concrete variables, I've got all of those areas of the brain connected, and I'm more apt to be able to figure out the problem. So the multisensory is incredibly important, and it's very effective. Orton Gillingham for dyslexia, heavy reliance on the multisensory. The odd thing is Orton Gillingham doesn't work because of the multisensory. The research is actually showing that it's because it's explicit and systematic. But still, you've got those same two. Same two for dyscalculia. Same thing for most content areas that we normally teach. The fourth instructional strategy that we lean on very heavily at Touch Math, and we think right now there's some real use for it, is errorless learning, which comes out of applied behavior analysis. If as a brain, everything that goes in is laid down in a neural pathway because of the chemical reactions that happen, then I don't want my first exposure to math facts to be guessing, because that's what I want. It needs to be correct. So errorless learning is simply going to be, we make it as simple as we can, is making sure that the first couple exposures I have to 3 times 3, I always hear 9. I don't get a guess. Does anybody know what 3 times 3 is? So that I've already heard it a couple of times. So when I'm asked what's 3 times 3 immediately, afterwards, within a space of a couple minutes, I give the right response. I'm actually getting positive feedback, which makes that neural path stronger. So those are the big 4 things that I talk to teachers about. But then it's also, so what are you going to explicitly teach the child are the strategies they can use when they struggle. A big one is using schemas, strategies, build it, draw it, write it. That one of where if I can't remember the algorithm, I sketch out the problem or I build the problem, giving myself more time, positive self-talk. I can do this. That's one of the big things that really helps. So it's things like that. And I think that applies to all teachers. So even if I'm not a SPED teacher, was taught those things in university. They're the tools that I've got in my kit to use for every content area. But when a child is struggling, regardless of whether it's diagnosable dyscalculia with an IEP, those are the tools that I should bring out first because they are the most effective and I'll get the biggest bang for the buck. Does that make sense?
Yes. Well, this is what we've been talking about for years on this podcast, which is the skills, the strategies that we teach of explicit and systematic instruction are good for everybody.
Yeah. It's how humans learn.
There's no downside for sure.
Watch somebody else do it, and then you help me do it. And then you watch me do it and you make some corrections in it. I go repeat it over and over again until it's mine. I'm going, that is not rocket science.
Just to share a quick anecdote, I had a guest in my house last week and I wanted them to learn how to use the coffee machine. They're here frequently and and there was some reluctance.
Fair, yeah.
It's not a fancy coffee machine, but it's not a Keurig. Right? You don't just put a pot in and press go.
It has steps.
There are steps. And so the first time it was watch me do it. Second time, do it together. And then the third time, she did it on her own. We are doing this all the time.
I try to work with teachers and I give them some do's and don'ts.
Sure, please.
I love do's and don'ts.
Okay. So I'll start with the positives. So do's, I think where you can, work one-on-one. And that's the most effective for a student who's really struggling with math. But that one-on-one doesn't have to just be us in K-12. There's the world that you have as educational therapists. You can do what I can't do as a teacher. It is difficult for me to find the one-on-one. Tutoring is very hard in a traditional K-12 setting. So for parents, it's like, good heavens, if they would keep seeking you out and we work together and reinforce each other, good heavens, the speed with which we can help a child is really important. So the one-on-one. the systematic explicit instruction. Another one is work at the student's pace.
Yes.
They need more time to process. And for heaven's sakes, don't answer for them. We talk about lag time, which I joke is what we in Gen Ed learned, and it's actually errorless learning, but we just learned to do the wait time, but that's after we've done the errorless learning. Well, it's not 5 seconds. It might be 10, but we just need to be patient. The other big do is don't start where the child is struggling. Back up to where the child is 100% successful so that they go, I've got this. I do know what 3 times 3 is. If I can do 3 times 3, I can do 3 times 4. Start where that works. Use real life problems. I don't care if somebody bought 100 watermelons because I think that's ridiculous. But, for my family to go out and buy a couple cans of beans because we're getting ready to do a barbecue, totally makes sense. So I think those are some of the biggest do's that I think are out there. Add in immediate feedback. Don't make me wait to know whether it's right or wrong because those neural pathways are firing and recording things. Teach me how to do positive self-talk. You need to tell me that this is okay as the adult because I think I'm stupid. So tell me that you have a problem. We're going to work together to fix it and we can conquer this. I'm out there trying to meet with adults who have dyscalculia. Well, they're all successful. But boy, they've had some struggles. And what could we have done if we knew 20 years ago what we know now? I think those are my do's.
Those are good ones.
What are the don'ts?
Don'ts. Don't answer for the child. I gave you that one. Don't have them guess. This is not a child for whom exploration into a new concept is the best thing to start with.
Say that again for the people in the back, because I wish I had some math teachers along the way who understood that, that was not the way to get me. I'm going to give you an example. I took AP Calc BC. I got pretty far in math. And the teacher would explain it to the class. I mean, it was like a small group, and I went to a public school. It's just not a lot of us made it to that. Then we called him the smart kid, right? Because he understood it all immediately. And he would get it. He would explain it to the rest of us, and then I would say it back to make sure to confirm my own understanding of everything. But that was a teacher who, we had the time and the space and the luxury to be able to do something like that, to have it be explained multiple times. And he was making it, and also with calc, it is kind of explicit, step by step, right? So I was a kid that enjoyed algebra and calculus way more than I liked geometry and trig, because I did not want to have to figure out my way to the end, right? It was proofs, forget it. So can you say that one more time?
All right. For a child who is struggling with mathematics, this is not a stage of math where you start with exploration and guessing.
Yes.
This is one where you introduce them and show them the actual steps, the concepts, and how to solve it. Once they've got that base, then you can ask them, can you generalize it? But I've got a neurodevelopmental disorder. That does not work for me. I think the other don't is don't skip around in the math. Don't start me where I'm struggling. Reason being, math is brutally hierarchical. You cannot do multiple.
It is.
It builds. And if I can't do my math facts, and it is important, the calculator is an important tool if I've got dyscalculia, but every adult and every kid we should still aim for automaticity because it frees up the working memory.
Yes.
I'm juggling, what 3 times 3 is plus 7. I'm going 3, 6, 9. I got to hold that. Well, if I knew it was 9, I don't have to hold it. I can get to the end of the problem. So you have to go back and keep working on those basics. It doesn't mean stay there, but it means keep working on them as you continue to move forward. So you've got to give the kids supports on that. And here's a funny one for you. Don't ignore sleep. The research coming out on what sleep is that we actually replay our entire day. Our brain goes through and starts to consolidate, stored in its right places, and all of that. So sleep is incredibly important. And it's funny, we don't often talk about some of that. And the other don't ignore the importance of the child's feelings. because that math anxiety can stop us dead in our tracks. And it's a vicious cycle. Oh, I don't want to do the math. Okay, so I have to do it. I'm so anxious I fail at it. That's going to cause more anxiety, which is going to cause me to do worse. And it's just a spiral. So we have to address the feelings and the anxiety and give these children and adults success in it so that they can go, I can do this, one step at a time.
So we know as educational therapists, as teachers, parents are really familiar. When parents are calling with kids who are struggling with reading, they are asking for Orton Gillingham. They are asking for Wilson. Mm-hmm. They have experience with programs like Linda Moon Bell. That's part of the zeitgeist a little bit.
Yes.
Where do we go for that with math? And I know you know the answer.
You know the answer.
So are we assuming that this parent knows their child has dyscalculia, or they think something's up with mathematics?
I think I'm talking about it from the perspective of the ed therapist, of the teacher, of like, we pull from all these different types of programs. What other programs should we be pulling from for math instruction?
Well, touch math, of course. That's what we were designed for. I think when you're pulling from mathematics, the biggest thing to do is to grab that assessment of where is it the child is struggling. I described the math progressions as a brutal hierarchy, and it is. You got to pinpoint where the struggle was and then go back to where it was in the progression that the child was successful and continue to build forward. So to do that, especially with dyscalculia, you've got to screen first. So even if the child has got the diagnosis, you need the assessment data. So if you're screening, even without a diagnosis, you can start to intervene on the area of math. And since a screener is supposed to pick up number sense, facts, calculation, and mathematical reasoning, because that's what the DSM-5 asks for, you get that done. And by the way, Touch Math has a free one out there. That is our gift back after we're 49 years into this as Touch Math. We have always worked with a student who struggles with math, almost always with a student with an IEP, but now we've sort of accepted that there's other students that don't have that. So the screener is a gift back to sort of say, there is no good reason for a child to have to struggle with math because they have dyscalculia, and there's no free screeners out there. So please screen, get the intervention. When it comes to the intervention, if the child is mild, use their gen ed curriculum. So those are built for a child who's moving at a traditional speed. And in the areas that they struggle, you drop down and you use the supplementals that are out there. But it's up to the teacher. Intervention is done via the teacher's instruction with the direct, explicit systematic instruction, the CRA, the errorless learning, the multisensory. When that's not working, you pull in the final one, the last resort really, which is us, which is Touch Math, because we're built on those. We're built for the child who needs to move at a very different speed, who has to have lots and lots of the concrete built into the problems, multiple ways of getting at it, lots of different ways of doing practice, instead of just seeing the same problem over and over again. And I think this is what you're asking. Is it, Rachel?
Yeah.
That's what we built this for. The multisensory especially. So you've got the specialized manipulatives, which go at a very specific stage in math development for tying a concrete object to an abstract symbol, and we put them together because that's the part of the brain that the child has not yet mapped. That a 7 represents 7 objects, 7 dogs, 7 porpoises, and that it can be represented as a word. It can be represented as this weird 2 lines. Who came up with that? So by placing the touch points on it, you can actually have the child physically do it and then fade it. It is a naturally fading support. It is not something that we expect students to use forever. We teach older students also to finger tap, because I get a lot of adults who come up and say they still do not have their 7 stables.
Yep.
And 7 times 8, they know 7 times 7 is 49, so they'll start to do the fingers, and it gives the brain enough time to pull back the fact, but it doesn't have automaticity. So that's what we were built for, and that's what we're used for.
So on the Touch Math, I'm familiar with it, but I know you do a lot of training for teachers or districts on using it. Is it one of those programs that, I guess maybe tell me a little bit more about it. Like, can we jump in and use different parts of it just like you can with some of the other programs? Like a reading program like Wilson, or like some of them you have to go step by step by step. Otherwise, they're saying that the program doesn't work.
Okay. I think with the way you've worded it, I would say no, you don't have to do that. Touch Math has 4 components because that's what a good program is. It's got a pre-K through algebra curriculum. So there you would go in wherever the entry point is in the mathematics for the child. So there's the curriculum, and it comes in print and digital, so that makes it easy. After that, you've got the specialized manipulatives, which are meant usually for the earlier stages. They keep the touch points with it, and you want to fade it. So child may not need the touch points. They've got the understanding of the abstract symbol, but they're struggling more at the later stages of the math, maybe into multi-digit multiplication, but they're there as a fallback. So there, you're not having to necessarily go back and use everything.
Okay.
They're there should you need it. So that's the manipulatives. The second part. The third part is a digital intervention tool, which is still aimed at the teacher, but it allows the teacher to quickly grab additional assessment data. We've got lots of data out there as educators and therapists. We've got state tests, we've got standardized formatives, we've got all sorts of stuff. But sometimes you really need to know what is specific in the progression as to where this child's struggling. So we've got the digital tool that would allow you to assess if you need it. Once you've assessed what is the actual, and you don't do all math, I want to focus on single digit addition. Go through and work just on that. And I want the data from it because this child happens to have that on the IEP. So, and then thirdly, you also want to have extensive rehearsal. We do not know from the research how long the myelin sheath stays thick enough in order to have the speed going through. Does it degrade? That's a great area that research is just starting to address. So I want to have extensive rehearsal, so I want to assign it. I also want to make sure that the practice, the extensive rehearsal, covers problems that I learned a year ago. I need to keep having those neural pathways fire, even if I'm a gen ed kid with a typically developing child. So that's the third part of the program. And the fourth part, which is just as important, if not more so, is training. Those 4 areas I talked about understanding the child and their disorder and the manifestations of that disorder, mathematics, actually understanding math and not being afraid of it and understanding how it progresses, the instructional strategies, and then the learner strategies. So you've got those 4 components, and they're not designed where you have to start at the beginning. Math starts where the child is struggling, back up to where they're successful, and then it's a toolkit. We want teachers to go, for this child, they need a lot more time to process. Don't force them to take 15 minutes. Don't force them to do 30 minutes. If my attention span is 5, get me through that part of the lesson. Give me a break. Go in and use the digital tool because we've got games. We know that computer-assisted instruction is extremely engaging, extremely effective, but it can't be the only thing. So we're trying to build a toolkit. I'm thinking of a toolkit that I would build a house with. You'd build a house that would look very, very different from mine, but we'd be using the same tools. Yeah, that's how I describe it, because having been a teacher, I'm a huge believer in give me the tools, make me an expert.
Exactly.
I can do anything with a child, but it's my brain that's doing the diagnosis and the prescription. And that's what I want other teachers to feel enabled to do, because that's what we went to college for. That's why we went into this profession. And that's my soapbox. And you got me on the soapbox.
By all means, it's important. And what you have to say, nobody else is saying.
It's resonating for us over here, so we can only imagine.
Yeah, you guys are definitely using a toolkit. You do not treat each child exactly the same, or each adult. So it's just like a doctor. Flu is much worse than this one. You're going to also drink Gatorade, but you're not.
Yeah.
I want to make sure we give you the opportunity to have you put out your ask, which we talked about at the beginning of the episode. You are specifically looking for adults, right? Why don't you share?
Okay, I think one of the biggest things around advocacy and getting the word out to address dyscalculia is finding adults who will come forward and share their story so that people go, oh, that's me. They'll identify themselves in it. They'll get themselves diagnosed, sort of start the spread with that. But what it's leading me to is the fact that as educators, we are teaching the children mathematics and hopefully the tools to go forward and go, I can be a statistician. It doesn't matter that I've got a numerical processing problem. There are tools that will allow me to do it. But we've got adults out there for, the last forever who have dyscalculia. This isn't a suddenly developing disorder. It's always been there, who are being very, very successful. They've already developed these tools on their own through guesswork, trial and error, you name it. I need to know what they have found, what they are using that makes them successful in math, even with dyscalculia, and match that to what we as educators are saying we're doing right now. Because if we're pushing some of the wrong strategies, we're wasting time. We need to hone in on what we know works. I need adults who have dyscalculia to contact me so that I can have a conversation, an interview with them, and ask them some very specific questions about what they are doing as an adult to allow them to cook. Recipes, math, applied math are very difficult. To be on time to meetings, to actually process math. Yeah. What do they find makes them successful?
Are these adults that have been diagnosed or undiagnosed as well?
That's an interesting question. I would love those that have gone to the trouble to get themselves diagnosed because they go, I can't be stupid.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also adults who go, I know I've got it. I've got the classic signs of it, but I'm 62. I'm not going to go and put myself through the diagnosis right now. I wouldn't mind having that sample set. It would be interesting.
Okay.
So what is the best way for those individuals to get in touch with you?
Email s.elliott, 2 L's and 2 T's, @touchmath.com.
All right. We're putting that in the show notes for this episode. So if you match her description of what she's looking for, someone who is, definitely share this episode, share her contact information with her because we're trying to make it better.
Yeah.
That's the goal. We're trying to make it better.
For everybody who's listening, and thank you for listening, especially to Rachel and Stephanie for giving me this opportunity, I'd like to make one real request of everybody. As students come back to school and you're looking at the data that you've got on them, especially for the standardized formative, whether you are an NWA MAPS user, an iReady, you're looking at your state assessment, take a strong look at that population that is probably at the 25th percentile and down. You pick the cutoff area, but it's that bottom group. And in there are your students with dyscalculia, that 5 to 7%, plus the others that have some of the symptoms. Screen them. Please pull dysctest.com, dysctest.com. It's a free screener. And then use that to make some decisions early on in the school year. Decide whether or not you're going to go through the diagnostic process. Feed this into the child study team. Talk to the principal, talk to the school psychologist, talk to the special ed team. If you have access to an educational therapist, ask for their advice. But this is a child for whom an intervention could very likely work. This is a neurodevelopmental disorder. This is something that needs to be addressed permanently. So that would be my one request for everybody. Consider early screening because we know that intervention absolutely works. And this may be the student who 15, 20 years from now invents a cure for cancer or solves a lot of the world's political problems.
I love. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to continue the conversation with Dr. Elliott on our Patreon. And so we're going to talk about anything else you want our audience to know. And then what adults can do if this whole conversation in the last 2 episodes resonates for them. And also what parents can do if this resonates for them. So be sure to go and listen to our extended conversation with Dr. Elliott over on our Patreon. And thank you so much for taking the time and having this conversation with us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. Can I have one closing sentence?
Please.
Early screening and intervention work. If you think your child or you are not up to par on mathematics, use a screener. At least it will help rule out, it may or may not be dyscalculia. It may be you need glasses or a hearing aid. So it's one of those things of please, 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 please. That is one of the biggest things we do for dyslexia and take it for granted. We do it for hearing and vision screenings. We need to do it for math. But Rachel, Stephanie, thank you so much for letting me get on my soapbox and try to bring some more awareness around this. And so please go forth and spread the word.
Yeah.
It's going to take us a while, but we can do it much, much faster than 20 years. Please.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being here.
Can you just say, have a great week, Smarties?
Have a great week, Smarties.
Have a great week. Thanks
Bye-bye.
so much.